Let's take a look behind the mod and let's see how Kaupenjoe's magnificent magic staffs are made. Alright, friends, let's back and tell you once more, and in this behind the mods, we're taking a look at Kaupenjoe's magnificent magic staff, or I remade Terraria magic staffs in Minecraft. Is basically the full video that is available on my other channel. I will link this in the top right corner and in the description below, and the general gist is that I have a couple of staffs, magic staffs from Terraria that I remade in Minecraft. And here the behind the mods is of course for you to sort of take a look at the code. I'm just going to go through a few parts of it and I basically will show what is going on. This is going to be for Forge 119.4, so do keep that in mind. However, I'm pretty sure most of the stuff should be pretty easily translatable between at least Forge and Fabric, and I think also between 119 and 180. But first of all, let's take a look at the items. So the general idea was that I have some items, right? So the general basic staffs, the basic gem staffs are pretty easy. Now, they do all have their own individual classes. Basically, every staff has their own individual class, even though if we take a look at, for example, the amethyst staff and the diamond staff, it's almost literally the same. I know that I could have done this way easier, just make a staff class and then pass in the magic projectile type as a parameter in the constructor. However, honestly, I didn't have time to do that clean of a job in terms of the code because I literally got done with the video like one day before it actually was published. I was like, you know what, as long as everything works for the video, sometimes it can be a little bit unclean. However, I do intend to clean up a little bit of this still in the future, but we'll see. Anyway, how do the basic staffs work? Well, they just use the use method right here, which is of course the right click method, and they add a cooldown. And then if we're not on the client side, we're then spawning a basic projectile, setting its type, and then calling the shoot from rotation method right here, which basically spawns it at the location of the player in this direction. If I recall correctly, this should be the speed. I don't know exactly what this floating number is, but this floating number is the accuracy. So basically, if you put this under 0, then it should always spawn exactly in the middle of the screen, and 1 just adds a little bit of variability, basically. And then adds the fresh entity to the level, and there you go. And that pretty much is all that happens for each of them. And you can see the basic magic projectile here. The big changes for basically the amethyst, diamond, emerald, radiation, ruby, sapphire, and the venom staff. Those are all based on the magic projectile type here in the basic magic projectile. So let's take a look at that one. And that is a little more complicated, as you can see. So first of all, we have, the enum here for different types, and we have the different type here saved as an integer entity data accessor. And this is a projectile. Now, the interesting thing here is that, well, we basically, set the owner to the player. We spawn it at the player's position, then adjust it a little bit so that it's not like right in the player. And then the tick method is the interesting method. So number one, I have this entity saver hit and the count right here, which might be a little bit weird. I've introduced this so that when the actual projectile hits something, after 5 ticks, it gets destroyed automatically. And if it doesn't hit anything, after 300 ticks, it gets removed as well. So that's like the general idea here. And then comes the movement code. I think I took most of the movement code from the arrow itself, because the arrow, I think, was the most sensible one. And then I just changed up a few things, I think, because the arrow usually, goes in a arc down. So the Y value of the movement vector gets decreased with each tick. And what I just did is I just said that it should scale by 99%. So basically every tick it gets 1% slower, which actually is pretty okay. So it will actually take quite a few seconds until it completely slows down. And of course the add entity packet here is very important. And then here we get to the second part, which is very unclean. I just basically have different particles that spawn for, both flying and also when it's hitting something. So when it's hitting something, you can see on the hit method, it basically spawns more or less like a ball of particles, and that basically determines the particle type. That's the general idea. And the onEntity hit method is of course the method that gets called when an entity is hit. Now, the first thing that's very important is that if it's the owner, it should not do anything, and also if it's client side, then it also shouldn't do anything. This, I believe, should be an or actually instead of an and, but regardless, it still works, which is pretty good. It also actually plays a sound on impact, which is really cool. And it then determines the amount of damage based on the type of projectile it is. So, it's like, this is diamond, I think. Yeah, one is diamond and then ruby and sapphire and so on and so forth. So this is the general idea here. Once again, this could be made way cleaner. Absolutely. So even though this works, if you do want to use this as some sort of template, please be sure some of this stuff right now is not clean at all. So I want to make sure of this. It works, but it is not clean code. Similar to here right now, right? So once we heard the entity, and if we have a venom staff or a radiation staff, then we're getting giving the entity, if it is a living entity, we're giving it the wither effect and the poison effect here in this case. So that is also pretty cool, but could be done once again a little bit nicer. And the way to probably do this probably would be to make one basic magic projectile entity class, make that an abstract class, have almost all of the same code in here, and then just have one projectile for each different staff actually properly done. That would make it way cleaner, and you could almost use all of the same stuff basically. But that's the way that it turned out, and like I said, it works, and that is pretty cool. Those are the basic staffs, and let's move on to the way that I made this. So then I took a look at the Blizzard staff and the Meteor staff, and those are really, really freaking cool. So the general idea is that the Blizzard staff and the Meteor staff, if you look at the specific block and you right click, then it should basically take that block and spawn something, X blocks above it. And then the projectile that was spawned X blocks above it should then shoot towards the block that you're looking at. The first thing was to figure out how I can even get the block that the player is looking at. Now, this should work. You can see I have a max distance right here of 32. So right now it works with 32 blocks, but you can do this basically with however many blocks you want. I believe there would be a limit because I think that at some point projectiles wouldn't get spawned because you're too far away from them. So if you hit the limit of your simulation distance, I believe then you could break this, which is definitely not something that you would want to do. However, I get the block position that the player is looking at with the level.clip method right here. You just need a clip context, and basically you're taking the eye position of the player, and then you're getting the view vector from the player, and you're scaling it by the max distance, and at some point it will collide with a block, and basically that's what I'm saying, it's the block clip context block collider, right? And I just want to get the specific block position from that, and that gives me pretty much exactly the block that I'm looking at, which is really awesome. So if you ever need that code, that's pretty much it. Absolutely amazing. I want to make sure that I'm not taking any air block. This would happen if I were to look into the air and within 32 blocks, there is no solid block between, then it would just take the block that is like 32 blocks away, and that might be air, and then I just want to consume the use. I don't want to continue because in this case, it would be just really weird. And the spawning of a projectile is, well, not that complicated in it of itself. However, it did take a little bit of figuring out how to properly do it. You could still do it better. So basically, I am getting the block position that the player is looking at, and then based on that, I am calculating 25 different positions that are basically between 8 and 12 blocks above the position I'm looking at. And there I make basically like a 2x2 expansion of block positions. I have not found an easier way to do this. There might be. I was thinking about doing it with an AABB, but that doesn't work because you can't get the block positions out of an AABB. I think. I don't know. Maybe I just wasn't able to do it properly. But regardless of it, it works, and it spawns randomly one of those, and then the direction here, that's just basic vector math, right? It's just the position that you want to end up at the position you were at, and then you just fire it directly in exactly that direction, but you want to use the shoot method and not the shoot from rotation method in this case, because in this case, with a shoot method, you can tell it the direction to travel into. And that is another interesting thing, because the Blizzard staff, that's the Blizzard staff, and the Meteor staff, well, that one literally just spawns large fireballs instead of, as you can see here, the Blizzard magic projectile entities. And this is very interesting, right? The large fireball, you may or may not remember, and maybe you've seen this, the videos, I did 3 videos on ChatGPT, and I believe in all 3 videos, I had fireball issues. Large fireballs were just swooping up in the air all of a sudden, and I can tell you now why this is the case. The reason is, the large fireball, right? When you pass in these 3 doubles here, these 3 doubles are not actually where you want to end up. They are not the position. They are the direction you are supposed to travel in. And that is why it never works, because it is interpreted as a direction vector, basically making it so that the large fireball just swoops up into the air. And that's why this never works. And that's also why you shouldn't actually call the shoot method on it. So you don't want to call the shoot method. You literally just want to give it the direction right here. You want to give it its position right here, and that's it. The rest, it figures out on its own. It's a marvel to me that I didn't figure this out sooner, but it is true. All right, so that's the fireball. The rest of the Meteor staff is pretty much the same. Yeah, once again, this one could probably be a static method in a helper class, and then would also work. But once again, it's unclean code. So please don't judge me too much, please. Right, radiation staff and venom staff, honestly, they are very interesting. They're literally the same that the amethyst and the other staff. So you can see we're just doing a for loop right here for and the number of projectiles that we're getting randomly right here, and that's it. That's pretty much all we're doing. So they are not as interesting. What is very interesting is the Klinger staff. That's the next one I did. And the Klinger staff, basically, in Terraria, it just spawns a wall. But of course, you can't do that because that would be 1 block wide and 1 block deep. That's ridiculous. So what I was thinking is that I wanted to look at a block, right-click, and then I wanted to look at another block. And between those 2 blocks, I wanted to draw a wall. And this, I was amazed that I was able to do that. However, I was able to do the block that we're looking at in the very beginning. So I had that figured out. I needed to save that block position on the item stack itself while you're using the item. Then you need to call start using item. I didn't figure this out for several hours, which is the reason why the release and the unusing tick and all of that did not work. Luckily, I was able to figure this out, so that's really good. And basically, when you call the start using item method, I believe that it is in here somewhere. Basically, it fires up the event, and then at some point, the release using is then called when you stop holding the right mouse button down. At that point, you once again want to get the block position that the player is looking at, and then we're doing insane stuff. So we're getting the first position, okay? We're then getting the direction. So I want to get the direction from the first position to the last position. The reason I want to do this is because I want to step along that way in discrete values. So I want to step along that way 1 step increment, 1 block increments, more or less. And the way that I do this is I get the direction vector by just taking the block that we're looked at minus the first position that we looked at first, right? That gives me the direction. Then I normalize that direction, basically meaning that I make it so that the length of the vector is 1, and then I step through it 45 times. Now you might ask, why 45 times? Well, the max distance is 32. In theory, if I look into one direction, 32 blocks, and I exactly rotate around by 90 degrees and look at the block 32 blocks away from me, in theory, the hypotenuse of that would create 45 blocks, or it's 44 point something blocks. So I was like, okay, let's just do 45. So then we're going to be safe, and it's always going to be that distance. And the way I'm doing this is I'm rounding it down. So normal rounding, basically, right? So anything that's 0.5 and over gets rounded up, and the other thing gets rounded down. And that way it actually makes a proper pattern inside of the blocks, and it will make it so that it looks like a line that was drawn inside of the blocks. Very cool indeed. And what I try to do here with the height map stuff is I try to make it so that if you would want it to spawn something inside of the air, it would actually drop down to the first layer of blocks. I was not able to do that, and honestly, I was fine with that because it's fine. Basically, okay, it's fine. I was happy with the way that this worked. And what happened here is then a Klinger wall entity spawns. So the way that I actually did this is I spawn a custom entity that has no rendering. Actually, it does have a rendering. It looks almost like the evoker, like Fang stuff, but I modified it in a way. And the way that I modified it is that I create a hurt area that is basically like on its position, and then it just extends a little bit up. And the way that it extends up is by 4 blocks, basically. So usually the entity itself should spawn inside of the block, and then it moves up the area by 1 block. So it should be above it. And then it extends it to 4 blocks above, and then it also inflates it by another 0.5. General idea is that will make it so that the area is a little bit outside of 1 block, just because if it's only 1 block, then entities almost never get hit because they're always not quite in the block. And then I found that inflating it by a little bit actually worked really, really well. And to my surprise, this all worked. And I was absolutely, I was gobsmacked. It was spectacular. When that worked, I was so freaking happy because I didn't know that I was able to do this, but I was. So that's really cool. The Skull Beam Staff, or in Terraria, the Shadow Beam Staff, creates a bouncing magic projectile. Now, the way that this works is that the similar thing happens in the Staff of Earth, by the way. And it is also actually a bouncing projectile. But you can see this is a bouncing projectile, and this is a bouncing magic projectile. Very similar names, and they share a lot of similarities as well, because both of them actually do a bounce, but they do bounce in 2 different ways. The bouncing magic projectile does a bounce in a way that works like the following. Once it hits a block, it needs to get the reflection vector of that block. So basically, usually, right, in 2 dimensions, it's very easy to think about the reflections, right? Angle of entry is also angle of exit. That's very easy to understand. However, in 3 dimensions, it's a little more complicated, especially when you have to calculate it in your head, because you're working with another vector, the z vector in this case as well. Now, the calculations are fairly straightforward, right? It's just, you just want to get the normal vector of the direction you were hit at. Luckily, you can get this by getting the direction that the hit was in. And luckily, once again, that is a part of the block hit result, right? So I just pass in the hit result get direction, and that immediately gets me the normal vector. So that's what I'm getting here. Then I'm scaling it by 2. And then also getting the dot product from the delta movement vector. So that's the movement vector, the dot product of the normal vector. And that basically, when I then subtract the normalized product right here from the delta movement, and then I get my exit vector, which is the reflection that I want. Now, if this is crazy complicated, I mean, it kind of is, but it also kind of isn't. It's basically really just some basic vector math, but it was very cool to figure out, and it worked almost first try. Now, sadly, this does not quite work every time, because I think that sometimes the projectile finds itself within a block that is not air, and then immediately gets discarded. I think this is the reason why. It is what it is, though. Like, sometimes you can't change it, but yeah, that's the general idea. And then the Staff of Earth, it's pretty much the same idea for the bouncing projectile. And the only thing that, interestingly enough, this is more complicated than the bouncing here, because what happens is that this was the one I first did. And basically, the only thing I want to do is that if a block is hit from the top, right? So this is why the get direction up, right? So if this projectile hits a block from the top, then what I wanted it to do is I just want it to reverse its y velocity. As you can see, this is much more complicated than first thought, because I basically, the way that I calculate it right here is just I'm getting the max bounces minus the amount of bounces that we have, 10% of that, and then I just get a random one in here. That is my new y value. That y value is not 0. Then I basically have a multiplier here depending on how many bounces I have, because in the first bounce, I just want to flip over the movements, so the y direction of the delta movement. Overall, this is probably way too overcomplicated than it has to be. However, I'm pretty happy with it regardless. It does tons of damage. It works some of the time. It sadly also doesn't work every time, but it is pretty cool to look at regardless. And then last but not least, we have the Spectre staff, which honestly it was one of the easier staffs to do. Now, here in the very beginning, you just make an AAB of the player's position. So when it right clicks, you just basically inflate a position on 15 by 15 by 15 basis, and it gets all of the entities inside of it. If there's no entities inside, well, then tough luck, you're not spawning anything. However, if there are entities inside of it, you're just calculating the distance to the player, and you're trying to get the one that is closest to the player. That sadly isn't always the first member of this list, right? The first element of this list is not always the closest. Therefore, I basically had to do this, one time manually here. But once that is done and you have a closest thing, you then spawn a Seeking Magic projectile entity right here. And that one is pretty much almost one-to-one the Shulker bullet, because, let's take a look at some of this math, right? So you're clamping the target's delta. So basically, you have the target delta X, Y, and Z as well. So you may make sure that when the entity moves, that you add this to your current delta movement as well. And not only that, you sometimes just want to, change the move direction in some random order, which just happens here. Select next move direction, and then it does the same thing right here. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm good. And I'll just copy this over, because it was also the last staff that I did, and I was on a little bit of a time constraint, and I was like, you know what? I think this is okay. And luckily, it turned out pretty well, so I'm actually kind of happy with this. And pretty much, those are the magic staffs. I mean, it wasn't too deep of a behind the mods look. You have, of course, access to this as a GitHub repository. It's going to be linked in the description below. And do also check out the full video on how I remade the magic staffs of Terraria and Minecraft. It is kind of an interesting video to see all of them in action as well. And if you made it this far into the video, I'm currently live with my 12-hour birthday stream. If you're watching this on the day of release, 28th of April, you can check out my Twitch in the description below. I've also linked this. And even if I'm not live, you can still leave a follow for some cool streams there. Otherwise, hope you found this useful, hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you all in the next video. So yeah.